You know, usually when we talk about receiving a medical diagnosis, there's a very specific expectation of precision. We expect things to be incredibly clear.
Right. It is almost like a form of engineering. We want that black and white clarity.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, think about taking a bad fall off a ladder. You go to the hospital, and they put you in front of one of those massive X-ray machines.
And a few minutes later, the doctor slaps that film up on the light board.
Yeah, and there's that crisp, undeniable image of your skeleton. Right there in the middle of your forearm is a jagged white line. The doctor just points a pen at it and says, you know, there's the problem. Your arm is broken.
Well, there is an incredible comfort in that kind of binary reality. As humans, we desperately crave things that are visible and physical.
We really do. We want to look at a situation and know, without a shadow of a doubt, what is wrong.
Yes. We want to know who is at fault and what the immediate solution should be. When you see the break on the film, the ambiguity just vanishes.
You do not have to debate whether the bone is broken. The evidence is staring you right in the face.
Exactly right. It is undeniable.
But then you step out of the hospital and into the world of human morality. You step into the spiritual condition of mankind. And suddenly, that beautiful, clear X-ray machine is completely broken.
It is entirely murky. The diagnostic landscape just falls apart.
It does. We see symptoms of something terrible happening in human behavior. But tracing it back to the core disease is not as simple as looking at a backlit piece of film. Welcome to Reformed Thinking.
It is great to be here for this.
Today we are taking a deep dive into the book of Romans to look at that precise diagnostic landscape. We are sifting through a massive stack of theological commentary.
Specifically, we are zeroing in on chapter 2 and the first half of chapter 3.
Right. The mission here is to understand an intense, radical leveling of humanity presented by the Apostle Paul. We are going to unpack how both the religious insiders and the secular outsiders stand on equal footing.
They stand on equal footing before a perfectly just God. It is a massive concept.
I am speaking directly to you, the listener, right now. Consider this deep dive a shortcut to understanding one of the most rigorous theological texts ever written.
We are stripping away the academic jargon today.
But we are keeping all the gravity and intellectual weight. So let us jump right in.
Sounds good. Let us set the stage.
The text begins with a harsh pivot that catches the original audience completely off guard. In the first chapter, Paul lays out a devastating graphic critique of the secular pagan world.
He details the idolatry, the chaos, and the utter rebellion against the Creator.
Right, and you can almost picture the historical religious insider listening to this, the person holding the physical rulebook, the person who goes to the temple.
Oh, they are nodding along. They are cheering him on.
They are pointing their finger at those outsiders. But then, right at the start of chapter 2, Paul suddenly turns around. He grabs that pointing finger and he points it right back at the insider.
It is an incredible rhetorical move.
He writes that whoever judges another is inexcusable, because the person passing judgment is guilty of doing the precise same things.
Let us unpack this scenario because it is fascinating.
It is like the loudest, most aggressive anti-corruption politician you can imagine. This politician builds an entire career on pointing out the flaws of the opposing party.
They whip up a massive frenzy of moral outrage. They demand audits and jail time.
Yes, and they give these fiery speeches about integrity. But then, a few years later, a quiet investigation reveals the truth.
It reveals that this very same politician has been quietly skimming money off the top of the treasury the entire time.
Spot on. Their own judgment becomes the trap that springs shut on them. The standard they weaponize against their opponent guarantees their own destruction.
That political analogy captures the psychological dynamic brilliantly. The commentary we are looking at highlights the absolute trap of the pointing finger.
It is such a dangerous trap to fall into.
It really is. When you judge someone else, you are making a public declaration that you understand the rules of right and wrong.
Yeah.
You are proving that you know the difference between justice and injustice.
So when you commit the same offenses, you cannot plead ignorance.
Precisely. You have already testified against yourself by the very act of judging another person.
But the analysis goes much further than just pointing out hypocrisy, right?
Oh, it goes much further. It moves into the very nature of the judge before whom all this is happening. The text explicitly states that God's judgment is according to truth.
Meaning it is entirely without error, bias, or partiality.
Yes. A human judge can be bribed, or a human judge might simply miss a crucial piece of evidence because they are limited by time and space.
But God operates on a standard of absolute reality. He pierces right through the public relations campaign of the hypocrite.
Which brings us to a really interesting psychological mechanism. It is about how humans interact with the character of God.
Let us get into that. The text addresses the fact that people despise God's goodness, his forbearance, and his long-suffering.
They look at the patience of God, and instead of being humbled by it, they treat it with contempt.
That is the part of the human response that really requires some thorough analysis. If God is so incredibly patient, why do people interpret that as a green light to keep sinning?
It is a staggering leap of logic.
I mean, you would think that experiencing extreme patience from someone you wronged would lead to gratitude. If you borrow a massive sum of money from a friend and they refuse to charge you interest, you should want to make things right.
You should feel a desire to change your financial habits.
Instead, the text indicates that humans look at that divine delay and view it as an invitation to double down. They double down on the very behavior that caused the debt in the first place.
The human mind warps patience into permission. The commentary breaks down two specific Greek concepts used in this passage to explain this.
I would love to hear those terms.
The first term is macrothumia, which translates to long-suffering. It is a very specific kind of patience directed toward the active opposition of enemies.
So it is a slowness in the infliction of deserved punishment.
Yes. Picture an authority figure who is standing there, fully capable of executing perfect and immediate justice against an active rebellion. Yet, they are choosing to endure the hostility.
They are absorbing the insult without striking back instantly.
The second term is anoph, which means forbearance. This is the act of holding back, a literal suspension of the immediate penalty.
Now, the natural human assumption here is incredibly flawed, is it not?
Very flawed. When humans see a delay in punishment, they assume it means an absence of justice.
The commentary points out a fatal cognitive dissonance there. We fabricate a false idea of God to suit our own comfort.
The hardened person looks at the suspension of the penalty and draws one of two conclusions.
What are they?
Either they think they are a special favorite of the deity and thus entirely exempt from the rules, or they wickedly regard the riches of God's goodness as proof that the general judgment is a myth.
I see. It is like a reckless driver on the highway. Well, if someone drives 20 miles over the speed limit every single day for a year and never sees the flashing lights in their rearview mirror, they do not think the highway patrol is being generous.
Right. They do not think they are being given time to correct their habits.
Instead, they think the highway patrol does not care. They think the speed limit is just a suggestion, or they're simply too skilled to get caught.
The lack of an immediate speeding ticket just reinforces the bad behavior.
But the text makes it clear that this divine delay is not passive. God is not simply ignoring the reckless driving.
Absolutely not. God's patience is never an endorsement of bad behavior. The commentary stresses that this patience has a specific pedagogic intent.
It is designed to lead the individual to repentance.
Yes. The text notes that God leads the willing. He guides them with a purposeful goodness. He provides time and space for a change of direction.
Yet, the sinner voluntarily continues in impenitence. They take the treasures of God's goodness and twist them.
They take the days of health, the peaceful moments, the delayed consequences, and the sunrise every morning, and they completely abuse them.
The text uses a terrifying Greek word here, correct?
Yes, thesaurases. It means to treasure up, to accumulate, or to hoard.
Wow. So the hardened individual is quite literally stockpiling wrath against themselves for the day of wrath.
They are taking the gold of divine patience and forging it into an arsenal of future judgment.
It is a total self-contradiction. The religious hypocrite is never more miserable than when attempting to force stringent rules on others,
while secretly stockpiling their own massive cache of guilt in the dark.
That concept of stockpiling, of hoarding wrath, completely reframes how we look at someone who seems to be getting away with everything.
It changes the entire perspective.
We often look at corrupt people living easy lives and feel a sense of intense unfairness. But this text says they are not getting away with anything at all.
They are just adding heavy deposits to a catastrophic savings account.
Every day they wake up in rebellion and do not face immediate judgment. They are adding another layer of interest to a debt that will inevitably come due.
They are hoarding wrath. And this brings us directly into the next section, verses 6 through 11.
Which describes the actual standard God uses when the scales are finally balanced.
Because if judgment is inescapable, and if God's patience is storing up for a specific day, what actually happens on that day?
The text lays it out with terrifying clarity. It says, God will render to every man according to his deeds.
It establishes a strict, unyielding division of humanity.
On one side, you have those who seek glory, honor, and immortality through patient well-doing. Their stated reward is eternal life.
On the other side, you have those who are contentious, who are partisan, and who disobey the truth.
Their reward is indignation, wrath, tribulation, and anguish. And the text makes a point to state that this standard applies to the Jew first and also to the Gentile.
The historical insider gets absolutely no special treatment at the scales.
But I am looking at this phrasing, and it introduces a massive theological tension.
It certainly does on the surface.
I mean, does this not sound entirely like we are earning our salvation through good deeds? Our whole understanding of Reformed thought is that salvation is a free gift.
It is a matter of grace, yes. Human effort cannot purchase right standing before God.
But this passage explicitly says God will render to every single person according to their deeds. It sounds like an absolute endorsement of a works-based system.
Like you pile up your good actions on one side of a scale and hope they outweigh your bad actions.
Exactly. Is the Apostle Paul completely contradicting his own central message of justification by faith alone?
This tension you are identifying is one of the most rigorously debated points in biblical commentary.
I can imagine. So how does the provided analysis resolve this apparent contradiction?
It provides a masterful synthesis. The commentary points out that seeing a contradiction here is an indication of an inadequate view of works on one hand.
And a severely inadequate view of faith on the other.
Right. Throughout history, some commentators tried to resolve this tension by claiming Paul is only speaking hypothetically in this specific chapter.
They argued he was simply describing a perfect standard that no human could ever actually meet, just to prove a point.
But the deeper synthesis reveals something much more cohesive. Paul is contrasting two fundamental life directions.
Two entirely different trajectories of the human soul.
Let us look at the first group, the seekers. They are characterized by a specific phrase in the Greek.
What is the phrase?
It is kathaf hypomonin ergu agatho, which translates to by patient endurance in good work. Notice that the word is singular, good work.
It is not a fragmented list of isolated good deeds. It is a unity of effort.
These seekers are the poor in spirit who recognize their total spiritual poverty.
Their good works are not a ladder. They are desperately trying to climb to reach heaven.
Rather, their good works are a unity of effort born entirely from faith. And within the Reformed theological framework, that faith itself is entirely a work of God within them.
So the pursuit of glory, honor, and immortality is the natural, inevitable trajectory of a heart that has already been regenerated by grace.
That is the core of it, yes.
I want to make sure I'm tracking with this completely. You are saying the good works are the fruit on the tree, not the root that gives the tree life.
That is a brilliant way to picture it.
The apples do not make the apple tree alive. The apples are the visible proof that the tree is already alive.
So when God judges the deeds of the seekers, he is looking at the visible proof of a heart he already changed.
What about the other side of the division? What is the trajectory of the people who receive indignation and wrath?
The text describes the second group with the Greek phrase hoi ex erytheus.
And what does that mean?
Erythea is an incredibly revealing word. It is often translated as contentious or self-seeking. But its root is erithos, which means a hireling or a hired worker.
It describes a mercenary attitude.
It implies greediness, trickery, and a narrow partisanship. These are people who operate with a hired gun mentality toward life and morality.
They are driven by bigotry and self-seeking rebellion. They actively rebel against the royal right of truth.
They become total slaves to the narrow-minded unrighteousness of party spirit. They want the rewards of the kingdom without submitting to the king.
So when God says he judges according to deeds, he is looking at the absolute substance of the personal life.
Good works are brought into the final judgment not as the currency or the merit that buys salvation.
They are brought in as the undeniable testimony and the necessary effect of a changed heart.
The standard is perfectly impartial. The text uses the phrase, no respect of persons.
Which literally means God does not accept the face. He does not look at the external mask.
He does not care about the ethnic heritage, the religious vocabulary, or the outward costume. He looks directly at the root direction of the soul.
That distinction between the merit of salvation and the testimony of salvation clarifies the whole issue.
It completely changes the dynamic of why someone does good things.
It is the difference between an employee who is only working to avoid getting fired, constantly watching the clock and doing the bare minimum.
Versus someone who actually owns the company, believes in the vision, and works passionately because they are invested in the outcome.
You are not working to get the job. You are working because you already have the job, you love the work, and your whole life is oriented toward it.
And the text formats this sharp contrast in a highly specific, poetic way to drive the point into the reader's mind.
The commentary points out an introversive parallelism in verses 6 through 11.
It is a rhetorical structure that works like a layered sandwich.
It starts with the glorious reward of eternal life for the seekers. Then it moves into the dark center, delivering the heavy blow.
Indignation, wrath, tribulation, and anguish upon every soul that works evil, Jew first, then Gentile.
And then it closes out the section by returning to the light. Glory, honor, and peace to every man that works good, Jew first, then Gentile.
The glorious reward is strategically placed both first and last to encourage the reader.
While the terrifying reality of wrath sits right in the middle, it is a brilliant way to structure an argument.
But this rigid, impartial standard leads to a massive logistical problem.
It really does. If this rendering, according to deeds, is applied to every single human being across history, what happens to the outsiders?
What happens to the people who were born on the other side of the world or in a different era?
The ones who were never handed the physical rulebook. How can a perfectly just God judge someone based on a set of written laws they've never seen?
Or even heard rumors about? This is the exact logical progression the apostle anticipates.
In verse 12, the text states very clearly that those who sin without the law will perish without the law.
And those who sin under the law will be judged by the law.
Paul is establishing that hearing the law read aloud in a religious gathering means absolutely nothing.
Doing the law is what counts. But then he introduces a concept that would have been shocking to the religious insiders of his day.
He says that the Gentiles, the outsiders who do not possess the written code, sometimes do by nature the things contained in the law.
When they do this, they show that the work of the law is written directly on their hearts. They become a law unto themselves.
I'm thinking about how this applies to everyday life. It is like playing a pickup game of basketball at a public park with a group of complete strangers.
Nobody showed up with a printed bound rulebook.
Nobody handed out a syllabus before the game started. But even without physical rules, every single person on that court inherently knows something.
They know that intentionally tripping another player when they go up for a layup is wrong.
You do not need a referee in a striped shirt blowing a whistle to tell you that a blatant foul is unfair.
The immediate outrage from the players on the court proves that a standard of fair play exists.
The rules of fairness are somehow hardwired into the experience of the game itself.
If someone trips you, you get angry. And your anger is an appeal to an invisible law that you assume the other person also knows.
How does the commentary explain the mechanics of this internal unwritten rulebook?
The analysis dissects the inner workings of the human moral compass with incredible psychological precision.
It introduces two crucial Greek terms, right?
Yes. The first is synodesis, which is translated as the conscience.
The commentary is careful to describe the conscience not as a subjective, fluctuating feeling,
but as a consciousness in man that acts objectively. It operates as an independent witness.
When a person who has never seen a Bible does something aligned with moral truth, this conscience bears witness with them.
Like caring for an orphan child or refusing to steal from a neighbor, it is that internal, joyous confirmation of being aligned with what is right.
But the process goes much deeper than an emotional confirmation. The text introduces the second term, the dialogismoi.
These are the reasoning thoughts. The commentary describes a continuous moral dialectic happening inside the human brain.
Imagine an intricate internal courtroom operating 24 hours a day inside the human soul.
Your thoughts act as prosecuting attorneys and defense lawyers, constantly arguing over your actions.
Every time a person makes a moral decision, a miniature trial takes place.
The conscience sits on the bench as the judge, and the reasoning thoughts step up to the stand, testifying, accusing, or defending the action.
Sometimes the human passions attempt to bribe the witnesses. They cause conflicting rationalizations and desperate excuses.
But the very existence of this noisy internal courtroom proves that the legislative reality of God is present in every human soul.
The unwritten law is indelible. It cannot be erased.
Even the most hardened skeptic, the person who claims morality is entirely relative, will instinctively cry out for absolute fairness the moment they are robbed or betrayed.
Their outrage is an appeal to a standard they cannot physically touch or read.
That imagery of the internal courtroom is incredibly gripping.
Every single day, we are running these miniature trials in our heads.
We excuse our own bad behavior by putting a slick defense lawyer on the stand.
We say, well, you were really tired today, you were stressed at work, and anyway, they started the argument first.
We spin these elaborate narratives to acquit ourselves.
But the judge, the conscience, is still sitting right there on the bench. The law is still carved into the walls of the courtroom.
No amount of internal bribery completely silences it. And this internal judicial process explains the concept of degrees of punishment,
Which is a vital part of God's perfect justice. The text says those who sin without the written law perish without it.
This means they are not judged with the rigorous, highly specific demands of a written code they never saw.
They are judged more mildly, according to the common law of reason and the testimony of their own conscience.
However, those who possess the written law bear a far greater responsibility.
The insiders who have been given maximum light and revelation face a much stricter judgment because they sinned against a clearer standard.
But the unavoidable conclusion the text drives toward is that the presence of the conscience proves no human being is entirely without a moral standard.
The whole world is accountable.
This internal courtroom, with all its arguing thoughts and rationalizations, is just a prelude.
It is a shadow of the final, massive reality when God will judge the secret things of men.
So the outsiders are held accountable by this internal courtroom. Their own conscience testifies against them.
But what about the insiders? What about the people who proudly hold the physical rulebook in their hands?
The people who show up to the temple every week.
This is where Paul pivots in verse 17, and the critique becomes absolutely blistering.
He turns his attention to the religious insider who boasts in God, who rests comfortably in the law,
And who confidently views themselves as a guide to the blind, a light to those in darkness, and an instructor of the foolish.
They possess the law. They know the vocabulary.
But then the text levels a series of rapid-fire, devastating charges. It says this very insider is actually stealing.
They are committing adultery. They are robbing temples.
And because of this staggering hypocrisy, the name of God is blasphemed among the outsiders.
Now, I want to push back on this for a moment.
Okay, what is your thought?
Is it not a good thing to be a guide to the blind? Should the people who actually have the truth not try to lead others out of darkness?
Why is this desire to teach and instruct framed by the apostle as such an intense negative? Is the text condemning the act of teaching itself?
The text is absolutely not condemning the desire to lead or the act of teaching truth.
What is it attacking then?
It is attacking the grotesque contradiction between the knowledge possessed and the life lived. The core issue is a severe lack of reality.
The commentary highlights the Greek word morphosis, which is used here to describe exactly what the insider possesses.
Morphosis means the outward form, the representation, or the pattern of knowledge. It is a hollow shell.
Picture a beautifully tailored costume. The insider has the correct theological vocabulary.
They wear the proper ceremonial dress. They can recite orthodox doctrinal statements flawlessly, but they completely lack the living substance of faith.
They are a hollow guide leading people toward a cliff.
And the specific charges leveled against them by Paul are not random. They are highly specific and grounded in the historical reality of the first century.
The text asks, "Thou that abhorrest idols, dost thou commit sacrilege?"
This literally translates to the robbery of temples.
In the first century Roman world, there was a documented historical reality where some of the religious elite would actually profit from the plunder of heathen temples.
While loudly proclaiming their absolute purity and their utter disgust for pagan idols.
Or in other cases, they would embezzle the tithes and offerings meant for their own temple treasury.
They exhibited a fanatical, corrupt greed. They would enforce the letter of the law on the common populace with brutal, unyielding strictness,
creating an unbearable burden for everyday people, while simultaneously finding clever legal loopholes to satisfy their own avarice and desires.
The commentary points out that this kind of fanaticism becomes increasingly profane over time.
A person who possesses an empty morphosis of knowledge eventually turns their religion into a sophisticated cloak for hypocrisy.
That is a staggering indictment.
It makes me think of someone building a massive, gorgeous house, but using entirely rotten wood for the frame.
From the outside, it looks like a mansion. It has the morphosis of a mansion.
But the moment a storm hits, the whole thing collapses because there is no structural integrity.
The insider uses the rulebook not as a mirror to examine the rot in their own heart, but as a weapon to bludgeon the outsider.
all while quietly stealing from the treasury in the back room. And the catastrophic result of this is found in verse 24.
For the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles through you.
The outsiders look at the actions of the insiders. They see the theft, they see the adultery, they see the backroom deal.
And they see the sheer, vicious cruelty of their party spirit.
And then, completely logically, the outsiders judge the God of the insiders based on that precise behavior.
It makes total sense why the secular world would look at that hypocrisy and say, well, if that is what your God produces, I want absolutely nothing to do with him.
The self-contradiction of the religious insider is just as fatal, if not more so, than the idolatry of the outsider.
The insider has taken the highest revelation of truth and turned it into a massive stumbling block for the rest of humanity.
That is the tragedy the text is exposing. The insider believes their proximity to the truth acts as a shield against judgment.
When in reality, their proximity to the truth is the very thing that amplifies their guilt.
And this massive failure raises a critical question about the physical symbols of their faith.
In the Old Testament covenant, circumcision was the ultimate badge of membership.
It was the undeniable physical sign that you belonged to the inside group, the chosen people.
But Paul addresses this reliance on physical markers directly in verse 25. He states that circumcision is useful only if you actually keep the law.
If you break the law, your circumcision effectively becomes uncircumcision.
The physical mark is rendered null and void by the behavioral reality.
And conversely, he argues that if an uncircumcised person somehow keeps the law, they are counted by God as circumcised.
Paul concludes that true identity is entirely internal.
He writes that a person is a Jew inwardly, with circumcision of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter.
Their praise comes from God, who sees the heart, and not from men, who only see the external badge.
I am trying to think of a modern equivalent to that kind of physical marker, and the most striking analogy is a wedding ring.
That is a great comparison.
A wedding ring is a culturally recognized symbol of a covenant. It tells the world that you have made a vow to be faithful to one person.
But imagine a person wearing a bright, shiny wedding ring while actively having an affair.
The ring does not prove they are a faithful spouse. In fact, the physical symbol actually highlights and magnifies the betrayal.
The ring makes the adultery infinitely worse because it is a constant physical declaration of a vow they are currently breaking.
The symbol only possesses value if the invisible reality of the marriage actually exists in their behavior and their heart.
If the reality of faithfulness is gone, the ring is just a cold piece of metal. It is a lie sitting on your finger.
How does the commentary unpack this radical redefinition of where the covenant boundaries actually lie?
Your analogy of the wedding ring captures the precise psychological and spiritual dynamic the text is illustrating.
Paul is completely dismantling centuries of ethnic and ceremonial pride here.
In the ancient world, uncircumcision was viewed by the religious insider as the ultimate mark of impurity and alienation from God,
while circumcision was viewed as the absolute guarantee of holiness and divine protection.
The commentary notes that there was even a rabbinical tradition circulating at the time claiming something quite wild.
What was the tradition?
It claimed that angels would physically alter a circumcised person who was sent to Gehenna, the place of punishment, so they would not appear as a child of the covenant while enduring wrath.
That illustrates just how entrenched their identity was in the physical marker. They believed the symbol itself was a magical shield.
But Paul strips that illusion away entirely. The commentary focuses intensely on the Greek phrase in crypto,
which means in secret or inward.
Yes. Paul argues that the true believer is the uncrypto believer. They possess a mortified, regenerated heart that only God can see.
The true distinction God makes is not based on the physical demographics of Jews and Gentiles.
The dividing line of humanity is between those who rely on the letter and those who live by the Spirit.
The letter being the external, slavish, contracted pursuit of outward rules to justify themselves.
And the Spirit, referring to the new principle of life wrought directly by God within the human soul.
This ties directly into the core tenets of Reformed theology. God looks at the substance of the personal life, not the civil, historical, or external markers.
The physical sacrament, whether it is circumcision in the Old Testament or baptism in the New, is meant to have a seal of an inward reality.
But if the inward reality, the new heart, the actual regeneration of the soul is absent, the external sign condemns the wearer.
It becomes a testimony against them, just like the wedding ring in an affair. True religion is an inward reality that demands an entirely new heart.
This concept was always present in the Old Testament prophets, who constantly cried out for the people to circumcise their hearts.
But it finds its full realization here in the New Covenant. The outward badge of membership means absolutely nothing without the internal regeneration.
Which brings us to the inevitable climax of this entire discussion.
The first 2 chapters of Romans have been an absolute demolition derby of human pride.
The secular outsiders are guilty because they ignored the unwritten law clearly operating in their own internal courtroom.
And the religious insiders are guilty because they broke the written law they were so proud of holding and teaching.
The physical symbols, the badges of membership, do not save you if the internal reality is missing. So chapter 3 opens with the most obvious question imaginable.
What was the point of any of it?
If the symbols do not save you, and both the insider and outsider fail the test miserably, what is the advantage of being the historical insider?
Verse 1 asks, "What advantage then hath the Jew?"
Paul answers his own question. Much every way. Chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles of God.
God gave them his actual words, the highest revelation of truth.
But then he addresses the massive elephant in the room, which is human unfaithfulness. Does the fact that the insiders failed so spectacularly mean God's promises failed?
Paul says, God forbid. Yeah, let God be true, but every man a liar.
God's truth is not nullified by the failure of humans to uphold their end of the bargain.
But I want to push back again, playing devil's advocate based on a twisted logic that the text itself anticipates and addresses.
Okay, let us hear the twisted logic.
I can hear someone arguing this. Wait a minute. If human sin and human failure actually make God's grace, his truth, and his perfect righteousness look even better by contrast, why am I being judged for my sin?
I see where this is going.
If my unrighteousness provides the dark background that allows the diamond of God's righteousness to shine brighter, am I not doing God a favor by being bad?
My lie just made his truth more conspicuous. Why am I still judged as a sinner when my sin actually promoted his glory?
This is one of the most brilliant, cynical, psychological deflections addressed in the entire text.
It is the classic antinomian argument, which boils down to the phrase, "Let us do evil that good may come."
The commentary firmly and systematically dismantles this manipulative logic. This argument assumes a transactional, highly cynical view of God's grace.
It suggests that a person can consciously engineer a rebellion against God to force God to display his mercy.
Treating God like a machine where you input sin to output grace. The person arguing this is attempting to rebrand their rebellion as a public service.
But the text states flatly that the condemnation of people who argue this way is entirely just.
You cannot treat the absolute holy righteousness of God as a mathematical variable to be gamed for your own excuse.
God is not dependent on human evil to manifest his glory.
Having shattered that final, desperate defense mechanism, Paul moves to the grand conclusion of his entire argument.
He strings together a devastating sequence of Old Testament scriptures to prove, beyond any doubt, that the insiders are in the exact same terminal condition as the outsiders.
He pulls from the Psalms and the prophet Isaiah, stating, "There is none righteous, no, not one."
There is none that understandeth. There is none that seeketh after God.
He then describes the literal anatomy of human sin. Their throat is an open sepulchre. With their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps is under their lips.
Whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness, their feet are swift to shed blood.
Every single part of the human instrument, the throat, the tongue, the lips, the mouth, the feet, the eyes, is completely bent toward ruin.
And then he delivers the final blow in verse 19. Now we know that what things soever the law saith, it saith to them who are under the law.
That every mouth may be stopped and all the world may become guilty before God.
This is the absolute pinnacle of the theological framework we are observing. This is the concept of total, pervasive human depravity articulated with unmistakable clarity.
Every single mouth is stopped. The moral dialectic of the internal courtroom ceases.
The excuses of the partisan fall silent. The pointing finger of the hypocrite drops. There is dead silence in the courtroom of God.
The commentary brings out the most crucial insight here. By the deeds of the law, absolutely no flesh will be justified in his sight.
The purpose of the law was never salvation. The purpose of the law is to bring the knowledge of sin.
The knowledge of sin. That completely changes the function of the law in the human mind.
The law is not a ladder. If you think the written law, or even the law of conscience, is a ladder we climb to save ourselves, you will spend your whole life trying to climb it.
You will look down on the people below you on the rungs, you will pretend you do not slip, and eventually gravity will win and you will fall off.
But if you realize the law is an MRI machine, everything changes. You do not try to impress an MRI machine.
You do not flex for it. You slide into the tube, you let the machine scan your soul, and you read the devastating results.
The results say total failure, terminal condition.
The law was never meant to cure the disease. It was meant to illuminate the tumor so clearly that you would desperately seek the surgeon.
The entire world, without a single exception, stands guilty before God. Every mouth is stopped. That is an incredibly heavy reality to sit with.
So let us look back at the massive amount of ground we have covered today.
We started by looking at the psychology of the pointing finger, how judging others is a trap that condemns us.
And how we mistakenly turn the gold of God's patience into a stockpile of future wrath.
We walked through the impartial scales of God's justice, seeing that God looks at the trajectory of the heart.
The seekers versus the mercenary partisans. And that good works are the fruit of a changed life, not the currency to buy salvation.
We examined the intense internal courtroom of the conscience, where our reasoning thoughts act as lawyers arguing our case.
Proving that even outsiders have a moral law carved into their minds.
We exposed the terrible hypocrisy of the religious insiders who hold the written rule book but live a hollow, costumed religion that causes the secular world to blaspheme God.
We redefined the boundaries of the covenant, realizing that physical symbols, like circumcision or a wedding ring, are worse than useless without an internally changed heart.
And finally, we arrived at a silent courtroom where every human mouth is stopped. The latter is revealed to be an MRI machine, and the whole world is declared fully guilty.
It is a relentless, systematic dismantling of every conceivable human defense mechanism.
Whether a person relies on the defense of ignorance, the defense of relative morality, the defense of religious heritage, or the defense of cynical philosophical gymnastics, the text leaves no stone standing.
It forces the reader into a position of absolute poverty of spirit, because it is only in that utter silence when the mouth is finally stopped and the exhausting effort of self-justification ends, that a person is actually ready to hear the solution.
The bad news must be absolute before the good news makes any sense. Which brings us to the end of our deep dive.
It has been an intense conversation.
I want to leave you with a final lingering question to turn this heavy theological analysis into a mirror for personal reflection. We started by talking about that X-ray machine, the desire for a clean, binary diagnosis of a broken arm.
But now we have seen the MRI scan of the human soul, and the diagnosis is universal.
So if the ultimate purpose of God's law is to stop our mouths and reveal our absolute need for grace, think about your own modern moral outrage. When you are furious at the hypocrisy of others, when you are aggressively pointing that finger at someone else's failure, is God actually holding up a mirror to your own hidden spiritual bankruptcy?
What does the thing you complained about most this week reveal about your own desperate need for mercy?
Keep asking the hard questions and keep pursuing the truth. Thank you for joining us on Reformed Thinking.